إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm going to be going today over the history of passports and why I personally don't believe that they are halal. Of course, I use a passport. It's kind of an obligation if you travel internationally, but still, I think that it's something that we should, at minimum, hate. And if possible, try to not be part of that. And so the history, passports were the first documents which controlled the movement of people through countries were just letters issued by kings providing safe passage. And this didn't start to become formalized as a legal system until around 150 years ago, as a worldwide legal system. Some documents similar to passports may have existed in China in the past. The modern passport is really very much connected to the nation state as an organization, and it identifies a citizen of a country. And it didn't really take off. It didn't really become formalized until the period after World War I. And that's important to note because that was the destruction of the last remnant of Khilafah. And that actually made room for passports to dominate as the global legal standard, because passport is just a legal document and there is a legal system that underlies it. And that legal system was not able to be put in place over the Muslim countries until the last arguably legitimate Muslim Islamic political authority was completely dismantled. So many scholars say that the passport is like a letter of safe passage, and they reference scholars from the past who allowed the letter of safe passage. And they use this as evidence to support that passport is halal. From my study of the modern world system, I think that the letter of safe passage is very different from a passport. And the reason is because, for one, letters of safe passages were issued by a ruler and not by the home country of the traveler. Letters of safe passage did not represent membership in a nation other than the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Letters of safe passage did not carry any expectation of loyalty to a group other than the believing Muslims. We have, for example, in Surah Tawbah, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. The believing men and believing women are allies of one another. And the key difference here is that the citizenship formalizes an alliance of mutual support with disbelievers who are not dhimmis. So in almost any country where any citizenship, your loyalty is to your country and to your fellow countrymen and women, whether they are Muslim or not. So it's not on the basis of religion, it's on the basis of nationality. So it's something different. So letters of safe passage did not generally, not as a rule, exalt, elevate, honor symbols of shirk or satanic symbols as symbols of power. So I'm going to link to this in the description, but I have a thread that I wrote on the origin of flags and how the origin of these nationalist symbols goes back to the Jahiliyyah, the religions of ignorance, the pagan religions. And that applies to the national symbols in most cases. There's not all of the symbols are animals. The majority of nationalist symbols are animal icons, but some of them have other origins. But
in general, it often, if you enter into this system and you say, okay, we're going to accept this seal of authority, it is going back to a religion of Jahiliyyah, and it is showing some kind of honor on that. It's showing some kind of belief that there is power contained in that symbol. The letters of safe passage, they acknowledge the sovereignty of a ruler over a territory, but the passport system accepts the sovereignty of the European legal tradition over the whole world. And I have another thread I'm going to link in the description, which is describing the origin of sovereignty as a legal doctrine. And letters of safe passage do not accept by default the idea of the kuffar dividing Muslim lands in order to weaken them. So these national borders, these were expressly designed. This has been covered by other da'is and other scholars have discussed this very much, the concept of divide and conquer, and how when the kuffar, especially when they finished off the Uthmani Empire, they divided up the Muslim lands in such a way that they would be weakened. So they also took consideration to demographics and tried to mix Shia and Sunnah so that there would be internal conflict, that these nations could never stand on their own. They divided up culturally similar areas like Maghreb into Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, and areas like Turkestan they cut up into Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, and areas that were very culturally homogenous. They intentionally tried to make them have distinct identities so that they could be more easily dominated. So this is part of the war on Islam and the war on the Muslims. And by acknowledging the legitimacy of those boundaries, we help to reinforce them. We help to make them stronger. That means, in a way, we're kind of participating in the war against the Muslims, which is a problem. So, that's very easy to imagine on this high level, right? But what does that have to do with me as an individual? What does that have to do with somebody who wants to travel to visit their grandma, or they want to go travel to study or whatever? What does that have to do with the individual? Can we really say that an individual has responsibility, that this is sinful on the level of the individual? Well, of course, the obligation, ikra, makes the impermissible permissible. So it's, okay, what choice do we really have? We want to travel internationally. If you want to take a plane and you don't want to risk getting put in jail, then you have to enter this legal system. One of the issues to frame this whole discussion, the problem is this is a system composed of so many people, and it's so big, it's very hard to visualize, it's very hard to imagine how one person's actions contributes to this whole big thing. But that's what it is. It's a sum of many people. It's not something that exists by virtue of itself. So فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. This is from Surah Zilzala. It means, okay, even if you do a tiny about an evil, it just seems like so small, it's still, you're still going to see it. And there was there's a story from Umar ibn al-Khattab, when a group of men murdered someone in Sana, and he ordered the had for all of them. And they said, I think some people said, well, but they only killed one man, and this was a group that killed him. So how can this seems imbalanced. And he said, I believe he said, Wallah, by Allah, if the whole population of Sana'a, this city in Yemen, if the whole population conspired together to kill one innocent man or one innocent person without right, I would sentence them all to death. He was basically asserting the concept that just because a large group of people engage in something sinful doesn't mean that it reduces the sin on each individual person who participates in the sin. There's also the other Quranic proof for the need for unity is وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Yeah, and so this is a command, and basically, of course, disobeying a command of Allah is sinful. If Allah commands you to do something and then you intentionally don't do it, this is a sin, right? I mean, I guess I'm a beginner in Sharia, but this is how it seems. So
if you participate in dividing the Muslims and establishing divisions between the Muslims and strengthening these divisions, that seems like it goes against this command. And nationalism, it's important to understand nationalism is artificial and must be maintained. This is not like a mountain range. A mountain range will stay there whether the people believe in it or not. A river will be there whether the people believe in it or not. A tribe has a real basis in lineage. You can say, this is my father, this is my grandfather, this is my uncle, this is my cousin. So a tribe is a real thing. A national borders and a nation state as an entity is purely a social construct. This means its existence is derived entirely from people believing in it and perpetuating belief in it. And this is why when you hear people talk about Israel and Palestine, Israelis hate to even mention Palestine or say that it exists, because they know that by talking about it, they're going to reinforce its existence. And at the same time, people who support the Palestinian cause, they hate to talk about Israel or mention or acknowledge that Israel exists, because talking about it will make it legitimate, because these things are social constructs. When we mention these, when we hold these symbols and say, look, I have this symbol of power here, please grant me some right by virtue of my carrying this symbol of power, then we are perpetuating and acknowledging the validity of these symbols. This has a normalizing effect. So if people see others doing this, then they follow suit. They think that it's normal. So when we do this, we make it seem normal. We normalize it. And it's not normal. 100 years ago, everybody in the Muslim lands could go to Hajj with a camel, and they didn't need a passport. If they didn't have a passport, no problem, go to Hajj. And that's only in the last 100 years that's started to change. So right now we're going to have we may still have people alive who can remember going to Hajj without a passport, and those people are going to be dying. That generation, the very last of them, will be dying now. So now soon we'll have nobody who can remember going to Hajj without a passport. The thing is, this whole system is based on democracy, right? So the international system, we have, the nation state is based on the notion that a nation is Sharia, it's legitimate because the people acknowledge it. And that's in the thread which is linked on sovereignty. And then nations are acknowledged as legitimate because they're recognized by other nations. So the nation is valid and has the right to recognize other nations because the people recognize it. And in a democracy, in a legal system where the asl, the usul of the law, qanun, is considered to be a sha'ab, the people, the validity and the strength of that system and of the laws that system makes is derived from the amount of popular support that it has, the amount of people who recognize it as legitimate, as shari'. So in the case of a democratic election, they will say, okay, this ruler has the right to rule because a majority of the people voted for him. And the problem there is, if only 20% of the people show up to vote, and he gains 50% of 20%, that means, okay, wait a minute, only 10% of this country accepts your rule. So how legitimate are you really? So when we enter into this system of legitimacy comes from the people, when we enter into that system, then the strength of all of the laws and of the rulers who are appointed by democratic elections comes from the people who acknowledge them. And in this case, when you take your passport and you request, you're showing with your actions, now even if you hate it in your heart, you're showing with your actions that you recognize this as legitimate, that you accept the power of the customs agent or the border control agent to grant you permission to enter this country, and that is an act of submission. And in some of the theory I studied before I became Muslim, and this was theory of the modern state, it states that power is derived from the act of submission. So power is a relationship, and when you submit to someone who's in a person of power, you increase
their power. You increase their own sensation of power, and you increase the perception of power from those around you, because everyone else sees, okay, this guy just submitted to him, and then he got some benefit from him. So I can submit also and get some benefit from it. And this is how power relations are formed. So it's strengthening the power relations of a system of law which is based on the sovereignty of other than Allah. So we strengthen these systems by using them. And the international law in Sharia, as I have understood it, could be summarized like this. Legitimacy comes not from the people, but it comes from only one source, which is Allah. And the authority vested in Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam when Allah chose him as the seal of the prophets, as the last prophet. And this authority extends through his successors, who are khulafa, according to the conditions agreed upon by the scholars. And this was more or less an unbroken chain until World War I, when the Uthmani Empire was destroyed. And you can argue that it was not legitimate for many reasons, but nonetheless, this is what was left of that tradition. And it was obviously pretty bad shape, and that's why it was destroyed. But nonetheless, this is the paradigm of international law in Islam. Territory which is not legitimately ruled by the system, by the authority of Allah, and the sovereignty of Allah, the mulk of Allah, is Darul Harb. And the rulers can be recognized that they're recognized that they have force. They have power over this land, but they're not considered shari, legitimate, because their people consent to be ruled, which is social contract theory, which was developed in the Enlightenment and is influenced by pagan religion. The Muslim rulers can make treaties with these rulers. That doesn't mean that we say they have the permanent right to this land. No, they don't, because they're oppressors and they're spreading shirk. Yeah, I won't get into that, but individuals may request permission to travel through these lands, yes, but this does not mean that we accept that the Harbis, the people from Darul Harb, impose their laws on our lands. And that's what's happened now. And that's why I see that there's something basically problematic with the entire system of passports. Not only that the rulers and different countries accept they enter the United Nations and they enter into these conventions, and not only that, but also that we reinforce this system by using it and acknowledging it. So yeah, and really we can only change this system if a large number of people reject it and regard it as illegitimate, which is that's why it seems to me that's what we would have to do. Yeah, that's what we'd have to do, because we need to return to the usul of Islamic law, and we cannot mix the usul of European Christian law and Islamic law, because that is recognizing as valid those usul which is based upon other than Allah, the rule of other than Allah. And I welcome any comments or correction. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah unite the Muslims on the truth in one political entity, and may Allah make us aware of what is worshipped beside Him, what is obeyed other than Him, and free us from this evil. And may Allah strengthen the Muslims and weaken the kuffar and his enemies. And اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. والحمد لله رب العالمين.